My name is Bill Burke, and I'm sitting here at the front porch of Kenny Vance. He's a close friend who's 94 years old and a Korean War veteran, and we're going to do an interview about his life and particularly his military service in the Korean War. So we'll start with the first question. Kenny, introduce yourself.
My name is Kenny Vance, and I live in Newport Beach, California.
And where did you grow up, Kenny?
Well, I grew up in a little town in the mountains of North Carolina called Newland. I was actually born a few miles down the road in the hospital in Crossnor, North Carolina, but I grew up in Newland.
And tell us about your parents. What do you remember about your mom and your dad?
Starting right before World War II, my dad had to be in the defense industry, and so he spent most of World War II away from home. Even before the war started, they started hiring people for the defense plants. And Newland, North Carolina, has a population of about 900. So there were no defense plants there.
So your dad was gone a lot, working in the defense industry.
He was.
When you were growing up.
War. Yeah, he spent most of the war in Bermuda. I'm not quite sure what he did there, but that's where he was.
Okay. And what about siblings? Did you have siblings growing up?
I have two brothers and a sister. All of us served in the military. My sister was an Army nurse who went in the Army during the Korean War. She was also in the Korean War, but the Vietnam War, and she retired as a colonel.
Okay, that's interesting.
And my other two brothers were also in the service. And I'm not sure what they did. Remember, I lived in California since I was 16, and they were way back there somewhere.
How did you get out to California, Kenny?
I came to California to visit my uncle, and when I knocked on the door, he wasn't there. So here I am from a little town of 900 people, and at that time, Los Angeles was the 5th largest city in the country in 1946. And so I said, what am I going to do? Well, I keep thinking about that. Why didn't I go back later in the day or the next day? But I went to an employment agency, got a job, and started to work the next day. And I was 16 years old.
So Kenny, living in a small town, 900 people in North Carolina as you were growing up, did you have a lot of friends you hung out with?
Yeah. During high school, I worked in the drugstore, and our drugstore was the only drugstore in the county. And we sold fishing license, hunting license. We were the bus stop, and so basically you knew someone from about everybody in the county. Let's say we only had 12,000 people to begin with.
How would you compare the way you grew up in a small town of 900 people, wooded in the mountains, with the way children grow up these days in areas like this?
Oh gosh.
It's a lot more complicated, isn't it, now?
Well, it was when you think that I came out here and found a job when I was 16 years old, and today 16-year-olds are still little kids. I took care of myself, and 2 months later I went to see my uncle that I originally came out here for in the first place. But in those days, Los Angeles was very safe. You could wander around the streets at night and feel safe, which isn't the way it is today.
And tell us about what schools you attended from the time when you were growing up.
Well,
what schools all the way up to your postgraduate?
I graduated from Newland High School, which is now Avery County High School. If I can digress just for a second, we had 3 high schools in the county, and they've since merged them, and it's now Avery County High School. But we had 16 in my graduating class.
Okay.
And so when I got out of the Army, I decided maybe I better get an education. So first I went to Pasadena City College and got my AA degree. And then I got a Bachelor of Science and an MBA from the University of Southern California. And I got my PhD from California Coast University.
How about sports? When you were in school before college, did you play sports?
You wouldn't look at it, but I was quarterback on the football team. I was a guard on the basketball team. We had to play softball because the school didn't have enough money to play baseball, so I played softball. But I think my best sport was tennis. Although there was a lot of people where I grew up debating tennis, but when I came to Los Angeles, I had a friend from church who had been captain of one of the high school teams and went on to play for USC, I think. But we'd get up Saturday morning and look for lost balls because a can of balls cost 75 cents in those days. So we played all day long, and I could hold my own against him, and he was the captain of one of the high school teams here. So yeah, I played a lot of sports. And
As an adult, did you continue to play tennis and golf? Or?
I played tennis for quite some time, but golf is really, when I came back from Korea, I started playing every Saturday, and then when I retired, then I played several times a week.
Growing up, would you consider your home a Christian home? Was that important in your early stages, early
we were
life?
all Southern Baptists.
Southern Baptists.
But I've been a Presbyterian for probably 60 years. And I've been a member of St. Mark Presbyterian Church here in Newport Beach for over 55 years now.
And you follow USC pretty closely, don't you? You are an ardent USC fan.
After our win over LSU, the next morning I got up at 7 o'clock and got on the internet. And now that we're part of the Big Ten, they all have podcasts. I watched USC from 7 in the morning till 5 that afternoon.
Kenny, when did you meet and where did you meet Julie? And tell us about Julie.
Well, Julie was my boss's secretary. And my boss, who happened to be my best friend, but nevertheless he was my boss, said that I catch you two people fooling around, I'll fire both of you. And a year later he came to our wedding.
So you didn't stop fooling around, it sounds like. And how long did you date Julie before you got married?
I think about a year.
Did you surprise Julie when you proposed to her? Or was it a surprise?
I wouldn't think so. We've been going together for a long time.
Okay. How about asking for permission from her parents?
I never did.
Never did that.
No.
Was there an engagement period, Kenny?
Yes,
were you engaged for a while?
Several months, I think.
Okay.
And we got married in the Mission Inn in Riverside.
Kenny, how many years have you been married to Julie?
It will be 70 years in December.
You met Julie after you returned home from the war, correct?
Correct, yes.
Okay. Tell us about your children. How many children do you have?
We have 3 daughters.
And what are their names? And
Carol, Kristen, and Kendra. And they're all KEVs, just like mine initially. Carol's spelled with a K.
Kenny, do you have any grandchildren?
I have one granddaughter, Brittany, who was born in Wisconsin and has lived in Wisconsin all her life.
And which of your daughters is she, your granddaughter?
She's the daughter of Carol.
And when did you move to the Port Streets, Kenny?
And about the first week in January, 1969. We've been here a little over 55 years now.
And tell us about the Port Streets. Do you like living here? What's good about the Port Streets? It seems like a wonderful neighborhood to me.
It is probably the finest family neighborhood in the country. People live in Newport Beach, and they want their kids to go to Anderson School. They got to move into the Port Streets. So the rich people who could live up on the hill looking at the ocean move here just to get their kids into Anderson. I think probably 25% of all of the children in Newport Beach live on the Port Streets. They're just, well, next door there's 4 little boys, age 2 to 8. Across the street from them is 3 other little boys from age 1 to 6. So there's 7 little boys in those 2 houses. Yeah, they're just all over. The kids are all over.
And they all know you, Kenny. They all know me. Yeah, when they come by here, they always
say, smoking my cigars, yeah. So they all know me. And then, of course, the dogs all know me because I've got a water bowl for them, and they come to drink your water. I have nothing else to do except sit out here and smoke cigars.
Okay, my last couple of questions for this session are important questions. And the first one is, when did you get into smoking cigars?
My friend who I was telling you about was my wife's boss, but at that point in time he wasn't. He had a baby boy, he brought in cigars, I smoked one, and I was 18 years old. So that's how long I've been smoking cigars.
And I know you have regular checkups, Kenny. And what do your doctors tell you about smoking cigars, and what's your answer to them when they bring that up?
Okay, I have a cardiologist, and I was telling him that I used to go across the street or across the park there and smoke cigars with Dick. And Dick finally died at 97.
He was a World War II veteran, correct?
Anyway, my cardiologist says the best thing that can happen for 2 little old men is to sit around and smoke cigars. I have a friend by the name of Bill Burke who should climb, the next time he gets the summit of Everest, should hold up a cigar.
You had spent quite a few weeks in the hospital recently with intestinal issues.
I spent 6 weeks.
6 weeks.
That's a long time.
That's a long time, and of course there were no cigars allowed in the hospital. So what did you miss the most when you were sitting in that bed in the hospital, other than missing your family?
The first thing I did when I got home was go see Julie, because I hadn't seen her in six weeks. 30 minutes later, I was out here smoking cigars. 10 minutes later, 2 of my buddies came. Yeah. So I really miss smoking cigars.
Today we're going to focus on your military service, Kenny.
Oh, okay.
And my first question is, when did you enter the military, and when were you discharged, and how old were you?
I entered January 21, 1951. And at that time I was 21 years old. And I was drafted. We were drafted for 24 months. But if you got to Korea and back, you got out in 21. So I got out in October 20 of 1952. So I don't serve 21 months because of Korea.
Okay. And what was your rank upon entry and discharge?
I was a staff sergeant on my discharge.
Did you have any particular aspirations? Like, did you ever consider the military as a career, or?
No. I could hardly wait to get out, go back to college on the GI Bill.
Where were you deployed before you went to Korea?
I stopped off in Okinawa for a short time, and they wanted volunteers for Korea, so I volunteered for Korea from Okinawa.
And why did you?
Okinawa was hot and humid.
Okay, well, I was going to ask, why did you opt for Korea? What was your reasoning?
I just wanted to get off of Okinawa.
Okay. Well, let's talk about the Korean War briefly. When did the war start and when did it end?
Well, it started in June 1950, and it ended in July 1953.
And what was the...
Actually, it hasn't ended. They've never had a peace treaty, so technically the war's still going on, but it isn't.
Why did the U.S. enter the war?
Actually, we were a United Nations war. We fought under the flag of the United Nations, and at that point in time, China was absent from the Security Council, and I think that's the term. And therefore Truman got it passed through the United Nations. So it was basically the United Nations that was the war rather than the United States war, except I think we furnished about 90% of the troops. So we call the shots whether it was the United Nations or U.S.
And what caused the war?
The North Koreans invaded South Korea. And basically annihilated the South Korean army, who wasn't prepared for many tanks and whatever they brought down to invade South Korea.
And how did the Chinese become involved?
I think because we were right at the Yalu River, which is the dividing line between North Korea and China. You could only assume that was the reason, but apparently they had been plotting with Stalin for many years to get into it. But the reason for getting into it, they claim, was we had troops sitting there on the Yalu River.
And do you remember when you arrived in Korea and when you went home?
We landed at Incheon, not the real Incheon, MacArthur's real Incheon landing, which turned the tide of the war, but that's where I landed. I can remember we got off the ship, and there was one Marine waiting to be transferred out, and he challenged a whole 1,000 of us. So he must have had a couple too many to drink, but he challenged everybody. So I landed in Incheon, and we took a train to Seoul, and I think it was about 20 miles, and it took all night long for it to get there. I don't know what we were doing, but that's how long it took.
And this Marine you mentioned, what did he challenge? What was the challenge that he issued?
He was just going to whip all of us to a fight.
Okay. What was your rifle company assignment when you arrived in Korea, Kenny?
Okay. Forward Observer is not part of the rifle company. We were merely attached to it. The heavy mortar was regimental, and we didn't even belong to the battalion we were in. We were strictly regiment, and I was merely attached to whatever rifle company we happened to be supporting.
So that could have changed. the rifle company you were supporting.
Oh, yes, correct.
You got to Korea before you became a radio man and then a foreign observer. What was your job?
I'd go out and fire the mortar, so I'd drop the mortars down the tube, and that was about it. That was about as low as you could get. Mortar squads were only about 5 people. It's not a full complement like a rifle squad. We had what we call H&I fire, which is harassment and intermittent. So you get up at 1:30 in the morning and go out and fire a few rounds to some predetermined target, just to let them know the enemy we were still out there.
Okay.
Probably wasting rounds, but we fired them anyway.
And what is a foreign observer? What are the duties and responsibilities of a foreign observer, Kenny?
A foreign observer is the one that actually calls in the grid coordinates for the mortars to fire at. We have a map and a compass, and you need the compass to shoot an azimuth to your target. Because if you want to go, say, to the right 50 yards, well, you don't know where the mortars are. I mean, your right may be their left or whatever. So you have a compass that shoots an azimuth to it, and then down at the platoon, they turn their weapons to that azimuth, so they're shooting it. They're looking like right over your shoulder, instead of there being over here and you're somewhere else.
Tell us how you became a foreign observer, Kenny. Did you volunteer, and if so, why?
I just thought it was a much better job than what I had, which was low man on the totem pole. And so I volunteered for the radio man. When I got there, that might have been a mistake, because they shoot at you up there, and the mortars were in a fairly safe position. They'd get a few stray artillery rounds close by occasionally, but being on the front line, you were about as safe as you could get.
So you started as a radio man, correct?
Yes.
And then take us from there to becoming a foreign observer. How did that happen?
After a month or so, our platoon sergeant rotated, and so the fellow that was the foreign observer took over as platoon sergeant, and they made me the FO, and that's where I spent the rest of my time.
Did you have to train, Kenny, to be a foreign observer?
I had no training, on-the-job training, rather than going to school.
Explain the difference between artillery and mortar in terms of how far the shots are fired.
Okay, in Korea they don't go quite as far as they do today. As talking about the artillery, they have rocket boosters today, which were not invented. So I think, and I'm being correct here, I think nowadays the 105 goes close to 10 miles, and the 155 probably close to 155 with the 155 goes about 15 miles with the new rocket that they put on them. As I say, they weren't invented during the Korean War.
And what about the mortar range?
The mortar range, the 4.2 had a range of 6,500 yards, which is about 3.5 miles. So the mortars were setting back somewhere, so you had 3-mile range. The 4.2 mortar is obsolete now. They use the 120. And the 120 goes 7,900 yards, which is close to 4.5 miles. Both of them are very destructive weapons. The 105 howitzer, which was the artillery piece, I think produces about 2.5 kilograms of TNT. The 4.2 mortar produced 3.4 kilograms of TNT. So the explosion was quite a bit bigger than the 100. In theory, and I say theory for a reason, we had a kill range of 50 yards. So if you're called a mission on a 50-yard line on a football field, you could hit people on both goal lines. Now I say that's theory because they haven't found any volunteers to test that, but it is a very destructive weapon.
Was the rifle company most interested in the range of the artillery, or were they more interested in what was closer to them, which was covered by the mortars?
Normally they call the 4.2 the regimental artillery because a company commander in a rifle company, most of the time he doesn't care what's going on 10 miles up the road. That's somebody else's problem. But the 4.2 mortar was basically their protection. As I say, we had 3.5 miles, which is enough to. We probably only had 3 because the mortars were setting back, but that was enough to protect their front, which is what they want. They're interested in that.
And Kenny, as a mortar foreign observer, could you call in fire from an artillery unit or aircraft, or were you restricted to the mortar?
An aircraft, and there was a spotter plane up there, and I called up to him, but I never did any artillery. But one time I did on a plane, and I don't know how they hooked me up, but they did. So I told him which hill, not to bomb us, the hill across the street from us.
But did you have authority as a mortar FO to call in artillery?
No, I never did.
Foreign observers were basically the eyes and ears of the rifle company and their mortars and their artillery, because
that's correct. Yeah.
And so they're extremely valuable for that reason.
We stayed out there with our binoculars looking for something, all day and all night. We're correct.
Were the foreign observers, Kenny, a particular target of the enemy because the enemy knew that if they could take out the foreign observer, they would render the artillery and mortars useless? Did that make you a particular target?
Correct. If they could find us, then the mortars were useless. They might all pack up and go home.
Were foreign observers particularly respected in the Army because of their importance to the unit as the eyes and ears on the front line?
We were with the rifle company that we were attached to, correct, because let's say we were their basic close-range artillery.
By 1944, the Army declared that in ground combat, the foreign observer is potentially the most powerful individual in the forward area. Is that your impression of
yes.
how you were valued?
Yeah.
Have foreign observers been replaced by drones?
I don't know. They probably use drones in certain situations, but I doubt that the foreign observer has been completely replaced by a drone.
Where is the observation post, Kenny, in relation to the front line and in relation to where the mortar and artillery units are located?
You have to picture hills.
Okay.
Korea was all hill. So we were at farthest point in front there, so we could see everything. So there was nothing in front of us. I can't think of a place that I was where there was anyone in front of me. They were on the side of me, but never in front of me.
And where were the mortars and artillery in relation to the OPs, the observation posts? How far back were they?
Our mortars could be several hundred yards back. The artillery could have been miles back.
Okay. What exactly is an observation post? Is it just a bunker, or are there structures?
I'm sure there are different ones, but stay in Korea, when we were all on hills, the observation point was just a bunker up on the front line that you could see, station where you could see, 180 degrees.
And how many soldiers were located at the observation post, and what did they do?
Most of the time it was just me.
And what equipment, Kenny, did you have at the observation post? Like laser
Just
finders?
a pair of binoculars. That's about it.
So all you had was a pair of binoculars? You didn't have laser finders or any of that new gadgetry?
No, I don't think lasers had been invented then, no.
So as a foreign observer then, most of the time you were by yourself, so you had a pair of binoculars?
Yeah.
And then you had a radio to call in the instructions?
We had a radio if we needed it, yes.
Okay. What weapons did you have as an FO?
I just had a carbine.
Did you ever have occasion to use it?
No.
During the war, when you were a foreign observer, was most of your contact with the enemy the Chinese or the North Koreans?
The Chinese. Yeah, by the time I got there, the North Korean army had been defeated, although they regrouped, but basically we were fighting the Chinese.
Okay. And as a foreign observer at the OP, the observation post, did the enemy kind of always know your location?
Did they know our location?
Did they know where you were?
I don't think so. Otherwise they would have called mortars or artillery on.
But if you can see them, Kenny, with your binoculars, wouldn't they be able to see you with their binoculars?
I couldn't see their observation post with my binoculars, so all they would see would be the side of a hill, and because there's just a small opening in this bunker, a little window that you could see through.
Okay.
But outside of that, we were pretty well camouflaged.
And Kenny, how did you observe the enemy at night with binoculars?
In the winter time, when the moon is out, on that snow, it was just like daytime. But what you're looking for at night, basically, are sounds, vehicle sound, or lights. And if they're, although the Chinese would get out and wave their lights at you just so you'd waste ammunition, but that's what you did at night. You were basically trying to just to hear some vehicular movement or keep your binoculars trained. You could still see at night. Nowadays they have those night visions, so it would be a simple thing to do at night, but
right.
we didn't have those in those days.
Kenny, when you determined the location of the enemy and you wanted to report it back to the rifle company or the mortar units, how did you determine the coordinates accurately to call in fire to the correct location?
Okay. I don't know whether you will see this, but we have what we call concentrations. And when we go up to a new position, we find certain places that we want to target, and they're called concentrations. And from those concentrations, you just look at the map, get the red coordinates, and say concentration 106 left 50 yards. And the same way with this one, they probably. But since they have our mortar concentrations on there, I was supposed to burn these, but I smuggled them home.
Okay.
And,
I won't report you, Kenny. Don't worry.
A quick story on these. On the 50th anniversary at the end of the Korean War, the Nixon Library put on an exhibit from July, I think 23 till Veterans Day in November, and they put these on display. So somebody knows I have them. My friends say I stole government property, and so they wanted to know what I want them insured for. Well, it's sort of like the MasterCard. These things are priceless. You know, I slept with them. Anyway, they insured them for $25 a piece. But here's our mortar concentrations here. And up here is Pork Chop Hill, which one of the few movies made about Korean War with Gregory Peck. And at that point in time, it was a target for me. And I rotated, I think, about the 1st or 2nd of June of '52. And a few days later, we recaptured Pork Chop Hill again. And then again, we lost it about a month or so before the war ended. It was a piece of nothing, and I don't know why we would want it. It's out there in a little hill with everything around it was higher. But anyway, if you haven't seen Pork Chop Hill, it's a good movie. They basically lost 2 entire companies trying to take the hill.
And Kenny, on this map, how did you determine the location of your target? You use grids, right?
I use a grid, yeah. There's, you can see up at the top these numbers like 31, 32, so you'd call 32, 24 or something like that. And then you had to estimate then from there.
Did you ever observe the rounds that you called in hit the target?
Oh yes, yeah.
You could see them hit the target.
You could see them hit the target. Correct.
And then I guess you could adjust fire based on.
Just sometimes, if your target was firing behind a hill for whatever reason, you use white phosphorus. So white phosphorus would come up and you could see where your round was.
And tell us, Kenny, give us an example of a typical day for a foreign observer during the war, in terms of when did you go to bed, when did you wake up, what kind of food did you have and drink, and just give us an example of a typical day.
Well,
as an FO in the Korean War.
A typical day is basically very boring because you're just there staring at the same stuff that you've been looking at for days, and we ate sea rations, so that's about all the food, you know, pork and beans and spam and whatever.
And what time did you typically get up and go to bed?
I would go to bed probably sometime after 8 a.m. because we were on full alert at dawn, and I would spend the night out there, so I would sleep sometime during the day, probably after 8 o'clock, maybe 8 to 4 or something like that. And then it would be time to meet with the company commander, so I would know where the patrols are going.
How did you deal with the loneliness and isolation of being an FO, Kenny?
You know, I would see people from the company I was attached to occasionally, and my own radio man occasionally, but you know, it was a job, and that's what I did.
Okay. Was there a lot of fear attached to being an FO?
A lot of what?
Was there a lot of fear in being involved in being?
You're 21 years old. You don't know fear in those days. Not that I know of. The people that pooped in their pants was the colonel's jeep driver, who was sitting there under a mortar artillery attack, and something that you're used to, and they're not. You didn't sit there in fear, as far as I know. Maybe some people, obviously some people do, but no.
Did you have furloughs as an FO? Did you go on furloughs, or you were able to?
Yeah, we got our R&R to Japan just like everybody else.
And what about patrols? As an FO, did you have to go on patrols?
Okay, that's a good question. One time, the FO was out on patrol, and the company got clobbered, and they had no protection. So our regimental commander says, no more. You're not allowed to go out on a nightly patrol. You're here to protect the regiment, not particularly that company. We might need you somewhere else, and we don't want you in some rice paddy. And so we weren't permitted to go on. If the company or the platoon attacked, we obviously had to go, but we weren't allowed to go on the nightly patrols.
Can you tell us about Norman Otto Frank?
Norman was my best friend. He said he was born in the basement of Schlitz Brewery, so he liked to drink beer, and I don't drink, so for whatever reason, he and I are the only ones that had any money in the platoon, and when the PX people would come, we bought up all the cigars and beer we could buy, and then I swapped in my beer ration for cigars. And anyway, he replaced me, and he was killed.
Do you know how he was killed, Kenny?
I don't know. I've never been able to find out.
And where was he from?
He was from Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
So that's why he enjoyed the beer.
That's right. That's right. That's why he was born at the Schlitz Brewery, he said.
And you visited the War Memorial, the Korean War Memorial, a while back. I think you visited with Kevin Lee. Did you search for his name, and did you find it?
We could not find his name. And I've researched it for hours at a time, and I just read once where it was a casualty, and I've never been able to find that particular thing again.
When you were at the observation post as the forward observer, were you ever fired at, or mortared, or rocketed, or sniped? Did anybody shoot at you while you were FO?
The last 2 years, basically, in Korea, that's what we did. And I've read on several occasions that they fired more mortar and artillery rounds in the Korean War than was fired in all of World War II. Now, we had a 157-mile front. World War II covered half of the globe, and so yeah, we got mortar and artillery rounds constantly. That's what both sides did to each other.
Tell us about your experience at the kitchen tent and how that affected you.
I was attached to one company that the commanding officer had the kitchen come up at the bottom of the hill so the troops could then eat a warm breakfast. So I would go down and when I'd start back up the hill, every morning we would start getting mortar fire. And I would duck into a bunker that I could find and hope that I could get up to the OP to find out where the mortars were coming from. You can't, but you should at least try. And anyway, I got to think, one of these days I'm not going to make it. And so to heck with that, I will cook myself some pork and beans sea ration. So I quit going down to the kitchen.
How did you cook those sea rations? Did you have a stove, or did you use...
You put snow or whatever in your water in your helmet. You had sterno, is that the correct name? Sterno. That heated it up and heated up the water. You put the can of pork and beans in and open it with a can opener. I still have a can opener. It's only about this size. And you kept it on your belt because that's what you ate was sea rations. And that can opener was about as important as your rifle.
Talk a little bit, Kenny, about the peace treaty negotiations, where they took place, and what battles were going on around that time at the end of the war.
Peace negotiations started probably 2 years before the war was over with. And there was a hill called Pork Chop Hill, which is basically useless for our side. But for some reason, the negotiators wanted pork chop on both sides. And so they made a movie about it. And if you see the movie, basically we lost 2 companies. Maybe there was less than 20 people left before they got reinforcements to help them. And I think the biggest battle, which the Brits had, the British Commonwealth Division, was at Little Gibraltar. And I think that happened about 2 months before the war ended. And again, Little Gibraltar was the high ground between the main line of resistance and Seoul. And so we could not lose it for obvious reasons, and the Chinese wanted it. But outside of that, it was just taking a small hill. They take it back and we take it back again. And so there was no divisions just going on the attack anywhere. And again, it was just mortars and artillery shooting at each other. Well, one of the main negotiations was that we revert back to the 38th parallel. The United States says, no, we're not going to give up our defensive positions. So I think there's about 1,500 square miles now that was once upon a time North Korea and is now South Korea because we didn't give up what we had.
Tell us, Kenny, about awards and badges and ribbons that you got as a result of your service in Korea.
I got the Combat Infantryman's badge, and if you're not familiar with that, that's the one that sits on top of, you know, a guy can have medals all the way down to his belly, and the one that sits on top of that is the Combat Infantryman's badge. I've got 4 other ribbons, which everybody else has, so they're not, they're just medals for being there, being in certain battles, and that's it.
Okay. And when you returned home, Kenny, how was your homecoming? How were you treated as a Korean War veteran?
I came home, went to Camp Rucker, Alabama, came back to Los Angeles, and got my old job, you know, the day after I came back. Unlike the Vietnam War, I don't think I don't remember anybody having any problems.
And did you ever suffer from PTSD, Kenny, as a result of your service in Korea?
No.
How would you compare, Kenny, the Korean War to the Vietnam War? You just mentioned a second ago about how the soldiers were treated when they came home, and how did the Korean War compare to the Vietnam?
Well, the Korean War, basically, the last couple of years was artillery and mortar firing. There was no real advances military on either side. You took a hill and kept it for a while and then take it back, and I think that's what got General Van Fleet in problem with Washington, because he said, you know, what's the point in all this? We send people up on a hill, get them killed, they take it back, we get more killed, and we're in the same spot. But in the Vietnam War, that was more like jungle fighting, when we were fighting on hills that basically had been destroyed vegetation because of so many artillery mortar rounds. So that was the big difference. And Vietnam was several years later, So they had more modern equipment. You know, they didn't use an M1 rifle or whatever that we had. So they're a little more modernized than we were. The Korean War started less than 5 years after World War II ended. So we were just using old World War II equipment.
And talk about how the war ended with the armistice, and how did the war end? There was no peace treaty, correct?
There was no peace treaty. They just had an armistice, and that's it. They've never really signed a peace treaty. First of all, as I understand, Sigmund Rhee, who was the president of South Korea, wouldn't sign it anyway. But no, it's officially still on.
And what are your thoughts concerning General MacArthur and how he was treated?
In my opinion, General MacArthur was about as good as we had. Obviously, he maybe made some mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes. But he was nominated for the Congressional Medal of Honor during the war with Mexico. Pershing turned it down because Pershing and General MacArthur's father didn't get along. General MacArthur's father was also a general and a Medal of Honor winner. But as far as I'm concerned, he was as good as they get.
And is it correct to say the Korean War was referred to as the Forgotten War or the Unknown War?
It's called the Forgotten War.
And why?
I think because it was a police action. I got my, eventually someone with good sense decided it was a war. Well, when I got out of the service, you couldn't even join the Veterans of Foreign Wars. And about 2 or so months after I got out, I got my combat pay, which was, I forgot what it was, about $450. That was $50 a month or something. I really don't know why people didn't think it was a war. We had a lot of people killed over there. And we fought basically the largest standing army in the world in the Chinese. And it's reported, and no one really knows, that they lost 1.5 million or 1,200,000 people there. And I'm sure that includes the North Koreans also.
And when you consider your career in the Army, including your service in Korea, what are you most proud of about your service when you look back on it?
I guess probably making staff sergeant in just a few months. But I made it just because of the job I had. And I had the same job as the staff sergeant I had as a PFC. I've read now that sometimes it takes 7 years, for the guy to make a staff sergeant. And they have to take tests, they're interviewed and all kinds of stuff like that. And I just did my job and got promoted.
Have you returned to Korea, Kenny?
I went back, it was the year after the Olympics, and I think it was 1989. And of course, Seoul, when I was there originally, was a bombed out piece of rubble. Now it's this huge metropolitan city. It's about as modern as you can get.
So what are your thoughts, Kenny, about South Korea today, as you see it today, and its future and how it's done since the war versus North Korea?
South Korea is a bustling economy, and North Korea, the economy is building the military.
What do you think it takes to have a good and a happy life? Looking back 95 years.
Well, basically a good marriage. We will be married 70 years in this December, and that's a long time. Smoking cigars, probably.
And looking back 95 years, do you feel like you've had a good and a happy life?
I have, yes.
And you feel like you've been blessed?
I have. I played golf till I was 90 years old.
Okay.
I've played golf a couple of times when I was 90. So I've played a lot of golf in my life.
What would you like people to know about your life that's important, that you would like to pass on to, after living 95 good years, what would you want people to think about?
Well, basically I have a lot of good friends. And I think that's important, just have good friends.
Give us some rules that you can think of to live by to reach 95 and have a good and happy life.
Well, I think if you would join whatever church you prefer and participate in it, become very active in it, and that's what I did at St. Mark. Being active in the church is very important, regardless of your religion or whether you're religious or not.
So religion and spirituality have been really important parts of your life. From the time you were in North Carolina, you were a Southern Baptist, right?
Yeah,
and then you became a Presbyterian?
I was what they call a junior deacon in the Baptist church, when I was a teenager, yeah. So I've been active in church a long time. And you could not survive the Korean War without this can opener, because that opened all your sea rations. This thing is now 70-some years old and would still work if you need to open a can of peaches or something.
Kenny, describe that uniform.
Well, this patch is the 3rd Division that I served with in Korea. And the 3rd Division in World War II was the most decorated division in World War II. They had more Medal of Honor winners. And of course, Audie Murphy, who was the most decorated soldier in World War II, was in the 3rd. When I came back from Korea, I went to then Camp Rucker, Alabama, which is now Fort Rucker, and that was the Minnesota National Guard. And they had been activated and basically sent a lot of troops over to Korea from Camp Rucker there.
Here's Kenny with his uniform from Korea. Kenny, if you could explain those badges.
Yes, the only important one really is the Combat Infantryman's badge, and the others are force service in the Korean War. You'll see some stars on there, which means you participated in the spring battles or the winter battles. The last one down here, for some reason, the government wouldn't allow us to accept foreign medals. So on the 50th anniversary of the end of that war, they allowed us to receive these medals from Korea, and that's what this one is. This is a staff sergeant.
I'm here on Kenny's front porch with one of my very best friends, Kevin Lee. So Kevin, introduce yourself.
Yes, hello Bill. It's a pleasure to be here. It's an honor to be here with you and Kenny. My name is Kevin Lee. I live in Fullerton, and I was born in Korea in a little village back then called Uijeongbu. That's the fictional setting of MASH. And when I was a little boy, I was left at home alone. My mother admonished me to stay there, don't move until she did some kind of task and returned. Well, during her absence, a friend of mine came over and entice me out. And little kids can get so absorbed in the moment. So we two wandered out and had great fun playing, and we got into an outside marketplace. And there I saw a excavator at work, and it was like to me, a huge monster eating dirt, and shoveling the dirt and putting it in a dump truck. And I was so enthralled by this spectacle. When I finally got tired of it, I turned around, and lo and behold, my friend was gone. I did not know the way back home, and from that moment on, I was an orphan. And so I was adopted to the U.S. 1963, I believe it was, age 4. And became a U.S. citizen. I remember the day that all of us were in the courtroom, and I didn't know it at the time how important that was. I certainly do now. I value my U.S. citizenship dearly, but as a little 4-year-old kid, it was just going through emotion. I grew up in the U.S. Would like to say things were good here, but we had a few headaches along the way. Parents divorced and whatnot. So, but I did put myself through school, and I realized education is very important. So that's what I did.
Kevin, did you ever go back to Korea to search for you had a sister too, right? Your mom or your sister or your family? What sort of efforts did you make to try to find them when you got older and were able to travel? And
yes, when I realized that I was not abandoned, as is in the case of many orphans in Korea, that I should have obeyed my mother and stayed home, I thought, well, maybe I should go back and look for them. So after finishing university, McKinley University in Illinois, which Kenny pointed out is the oldest 4-year college in the state of Illinois. I had forgotten that part, but Kenny's sharp mind reminded me of that. After college, I went back to Korea in search of my roots. And the problem was I did not know my name or my birth date. I still don't know them. So I had to go on mass media, magazines, newspapers, TV, radio, in search of my roots. And many people came claiming a relationship to me, unfortunately for some ulterior motives, meaning I had a U.S. passport and they wanted to immigrate there. This was back in the early 80s, which back then was very difficult to come to the U.S. So in a way, I feel like I got a PhD in life because I went through all this emotional roller coaster. I did not find my biological family. I know I had an older sister, and I took DNA tests and left the results with National Police there. There were so many families separated by the Korean War that the National Police have a database. It's free, and if you submit your DNA results and they find a match, then they will connect people who have been separated. And so I thought, well, maybe that's a possibility in my case. So I gave my results, but unfortunately none of my family members have done the same, so I'm still waiting on that. I did not find my family, but I did come in to terms with my heritage. In the U.S., we all have a heritage, even the Native Americans, so to speak, who immigrated across the Bering Strait and came down, right? So my heritage happens to be Korean, although I am a U.S. citizen, and people often ask me, do you like Korea or the U.S. more? And I ask them in reply, do you love your mother or your father more? Unanswerable. I was born in Korea, that's my motherland. I was educated, raised up, and my way of thinking is American. So that's the story there.
So you're American through and through, right?
I
Kevin?
sure am.
But you love your birth country too.
That's right. That's 100% correct, and I'm very thankful to people like Kenny who made it possible for me to be here. Without brave soldiers and people in military who protected Korea, from communism, I doubt I would be sitting here with you today.
You talking about Kenny, how did you meet him, Kevin?
Well, I have to give thanks to you, Bill. Of course, you and I met through the Adventurers Club, and we're both members of the Explorers Club as well. But through our friendship, you had invited me one day some years ago to visit Kenny because you knew that he was a Korean War veteran. And of course, me being Korean, this was nice that we could connect and get together. So that's how I met Kenny.
Tell us a little bit about why Kenny's life and his service in the United States Army in Korea is so important to you and special to you.
Well, and you phrased it just right. It is very special. I salute and admire and respect all our veterans. Being an American, the history of what American vets have done for our country, I certainly have a lot of gratitude. But in terms of Kenny, it's meeting him in person gives a very personal touch to it. And so I've heard stories from Kenny about his service in the Army in Korea. I know that it was a time of great suffering, and he's seen a lot of things that humans shouldn't see, but his service, as well as all his compatriots, rescued Korea, and literally I probably would not be sitting here were it not for Kenny and his fellow soldiers. So I really do appreciate his service.
Do you think, Kevin, that most South Koreans feel the same way about the people that served in the Korean War?
That's a very good question. I believe basically they do. As you know, sometimes the younger generations, because they don't have the direct experience, they may not appreciate it as well. But certainly the older generations, because they lived through such terrible times, do appreciate what America did and is doing. It's just a matter of I think better education for the youngsters so they fully understand what went on. By the way, in addition, the Korean government itself has been and still is very appreciative of the service of American soldiers, airmen, etc. in the military. They have a program that invites the Korean War vets to Korea, all expenses paid, put them up in Korea and show them around the country. And most veterans who do this are very surprised at the amount of development. I mean, Korea was just bombed to smithereens in the 50s, and now it's one of the world's leading countries economically, so they're very proud of that.
Tell us about your trip with Kenny to the Korean War Memorial, Kevin.
Sure. That was a special time. The Korean War Memorial in Fullerton took many years to construct. And, I'd known Kenny at that time, and I told him once it's completed, I'd be happy to come down, pick him up, and take him over to see this memorial. It's a beautiful memorial, very simply stated, granite, black marble slabs with the names of all the soldiers who died in combat. And one reason we were there was to look for Kenny's good friend, Norman Prang was his name. We searched every slab from every state, and we did this twice. We combed through the entire lists. Unfortunately, we did not find his name. But I think it was a good visit, probably emotional for Kenny. No doubt brought back some memories, and it's a place of it's a sacred place because the names there represent human beings who sacrificed their lives for freedom.
Kevin, tell us who Norman Prang is.
Well, as far as I know, talking directly with Kenny, Norman Prang is the person who relieved Kenny as a forward observer. That's a very difficult thing to do, and you're on the front line and being shot at. And Norman Prang and Kenny were close friends. And of course, I don't know that feeling, but I'm sure there's a very strong bond when you're out there in combat together. And all these years, Kenny's tried to locate Norman because of that bond, but unfortunately, we were not able to find Norman's name on that in the Korean War memorial in Fullerton. There are slabs with each state and all the soldiers who were deceased from that state in combat. But we looked over all of those twice and could not find that name. But that's who Norman Prang was.
So if there's anyone watching this video that could help us find out more information about Norman, we would deeply appreciate anything you can find out or any leads you can give us so we can find out more specifically what happened to him, because both Kenny has looked very hard to get more information on him, and Kevin helped him at the Korean War Memorial, but maybe there's other ways we can research this and get a little bit more information that would be really meaningful to Kenny. So we see Kenny and Kevin together here. Kevin, you've given us some really good information about your life and your relationship with Kenny and the Korean War. Is there anything more you want to add to what you have said?
Well, sure. I could speak all day long about Kenny. I admire and respect him. And I just picked up this rock by the chair. It says 95. That he just had his 95th birthday, and a local neighborhood kid made this and presented it to him. So Kenny has lived a full life, and he's done so many things. I suppose that the best accolade you could give anyone is to say that they've been a good person, and really mean that. Kenny is a very good person, very compassionate, so many good qualities. I wish we had more other people like you, Kenny. And so I've met his daughters, his wife. They're just salt of the earth, grassroots people. We respect and admire you so much, Kenny, and I'm very proud and honored to be your friend.
I appreciate that. I lived up in the mountains where I grew up, but not the kind of mountains that you and Kevin climbed.
So, Kenny, I'm sure you really value your friendship with Kevin, and I'm so glad that you two got to know each other. You've got very different perspectives both on your life and on the service in Korea, and it's just great to see you two together.
Yeah, I appreciate Kevin too, because when I was in the hospital, he came over and to make sure that my wife is okay, and he's one of the great friends.